I've noticed a trend where when people on Reddit or in forum threads discuss a caster and their knowledge, especially relative to other casters, the way they model this concept and present it is one which goes very counter to what I've experienced myself from working in analysis and casting and from knowing other casters and especially from knowing about sports casting. So people tend to present it, these laymen, as one caster knows more than another or is more knowledgeable or has more knowledge than the other caster, and they'll model it so that there's like a direct ranking where this one knows more than that one, no more than that one, knows no more than that one. Now, part of the problem is first and foremost, it's not a linear progression improving as a caster and gaining knowledge. I mean, forget all aspects of casting. Just gaining knowledge doesn't work that way. It's not as though you're a young child learning to read and there's these chapters that go, right, well, I've done level 1 of learning and here's chapter 2 of learning, here's chapter 3. Oh, what chapter are you on? Oh, I'm on chapter 5, so I know all of the ones up to chapter 5 and chapter 5, whereas you're on level 3, so you only know 1, 2, and 3, but I know those 3 and the next 2. It's not a linear progression like that, knowledge itself, because think about human knowledge. There's so much human knowledge out there that it's impossible for us all to know it all. We can't even all be well-rounded. We're all knowing a bit more in this area, a bit less in this area, a bit more than this other area. We might know some areas well-rounded, but then this area we're completely ignorant of. We might know extremely a lot about this and nothing about this over here. I mean, knowledge and understanding games themselves is not like a game which has progression, like an on-the-rails old-school Mario game where you go from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 to level 4. Obviously, it doesn't work that way, does it? This way of talking about it, though, and discussing it, that's why it's unproductive, because it implies as though there was like a percentage, and the best caster in the world's at 90%, and anyone who's below him, he knows all 80% and the 10% extra that he has above them. It doesn't work that way with knowledge. Definitely doesn't work that way with knowledge within the game context of modeling a game and understanding the metagame concepts. Certainly doesn't work that way in terms of the casting skill set and then knowledge as well. So, to me, talking about knowledge, especially in this very niche area of casting knowledge, specifically mainly color casting knowledge we're talking about here, shows an ignorance to me of the field of casting and even of human intellectual thought of knowledge, but that's a bit abstract, so we'll keep it within the casting world. So I'm mainly talking about color specific casting here, even though within a play-by-play context I could certainly break down different areas within that which people talk about, this guy's better than that guy, but they don't quantify it and they don't realize actually play-by-play casting has a different skill set in many different areas, that some people have mastered one, others have mastered another, others have a well-rounded aspect, someone's the best in this area but rubbish in this one. Could do a whole video about that, maybe I will one day, but we'll keep this color specific right now, and I'm going to make this League of Legends specific in a bit in the video, because that's mainly what spurred me to think about this topic, and I can give examples from League of Legends, but for right now I'll keep it a bit abstract for the other games. So first and foremost, no caster in any esports game I have ever followed is the ultimate caster. And what I mean by that, we're talking about color casters here. There is no caster who is better, more knowledgeable, and has been more thoroughly researching every area than any single specialist who is the best in that one area. There's no one caster who was like, well, he's the best in that one, but he's also the best in this one and this one and this one. It's never happened. I've never seen it ever happen, because the amount of knowledge is so diverse. The frequency of how much there is to understand and constantly keep maintaining and evolving and progressing in those areas. Sometimes, if you're an exceptional caster, maybe even be innovating and pioneering the new boundaries of thought within that one area. There's no one who could do all of that and be the best in all the other areas. So as a result, you have these specialists, not that they only focus on that, but that's the one area they're the best in, they work on that, and then they work on the others, but they're not as good in those areas. Part of the reason why there isn't someone who's the ultimate caster like that is because, first of all, there's not enough raw talent in the universe. When people talk about talent, it's very rare that you have godlike talent beyond 1 or 2 areas. You have to work on the other areas. Michael Jordan did not have godlike talent in every area of the game. For example, he had to work on shooting a lot in his career. He had to work on team concepts of when to get other people involved. When you're talking about this, there's not just enough raw talent in the world. There isn't enough in any one person. There's also not enough time in the day, logistically, to have maximum knowledge about everything. Because that means watching every league in the world. That means watching every star player in the game individually. That means watching the teams in a larger context. That means modeling the teams in a larger context. That means in League of Legends, watching the pick ban, watching the emerging meta. In other games, that means watching the smaller meta of different play, watching people online and offline, watching new patches come in and how they affect the overall game. There will never be one person who can cover all that, even just logistically. Time in the day, interest in these areas, and then basic talent to be able to do all of that anyway. It will never happen. And so as a result, there will always be specialists. So the key thing to understand, first and foremost, is that all casters color casters learn a base of knowledge, some basics, some simple models for how to approach the game, some techniques for how to articulate them. Often they share similarities, and so I can understand why to the layman, when he's looking at the color caster and listening to him, he might think that they all do have these levels they go through, and this guy, because he's more advanced in one area, is better than this other guy who's less advanced in that area, without acknowledging and examining the whole context of casting necessarily. I mean, you might have your own biases to what you like more than other areas. So all casters do learn a base of knowledge, especially when they follow each other, and these are the simple concepts, so they pick things up, and maybe one's better at that and one's better at another. Now, this base knowledge, sure, someone might be very, very, very well rounded, but beyond that, all casters develop their style and strengths according to their style of modeling the game, how they think of the game, the techniques that they use to put other aspects in there and build sub-models and connect models together. And then when one doesn't work, they remodel and adapt to a new aspect, and how they inculcate and integrate more knowledge into their overall pool and then apply that in the game. The way they articulate the game, and they think about their thoughts but then articulate them through their mouth. Obviously, it's no good just having fantastic thoughts and models in your mind if you can't really speak very well and they don't flow well for how you talk. So this also determines how a caster gains knowledge and models knowledge and maintains knowledge and then applies knowledge to what happens and then articulates it. They all develop specialties, or let's just say strengths, areas in which they're particularly strong compared to the norm of casters. And actually, really great producers and really great tournament organizers even compose the crews, the talent lineups of who they hire based around those strengths. So that first of all, you have all the big strengths covered if you can. Then you have complementary strengths that work well together. Or this guy actually boosts this guy over here. I mean, in CSGO, just to give a quick example, I don't follow the game on a play-by-play level in terms of the tactic necessarily, because I've specialized in map pick. So I do that, Yanko does that, and then me and him synergize in that way. Now, going into League of Legends specific examples, I'll actually go through some of the famous casters now, and I'll give you what I consider some of their specialties. So, okay, we'll start with someone who quite recently became a caster, which is Crepo, the former legendary Western support player of CLG and Evil Genius's fame, and later Elements, but he probably wants to forget that period of time. So Crepo's specialty is, yes, it's overall the support position, because that's the position he played for many seasons. But if you want to talk about specialties, an area where he is unusually good compared to other casters, it's not just support position. It would specifically be build paths, and here's the second part, build paths in themselves, how to build in what order, but then the impact they have on mid to late game. Now, the reason why this is so important is because some of the best moments that I've heard Crepo have as a color caster have come where he's able to identify a fight where all other aspects of the fight in general make sense, like which carries are playing in what way, how they attack the team fight, how the strengths of the champions, what items they had played out. But then in the support position, every now and then he'll be able to note a time where having one item or not having it is what turned this fight and ultimately led to one of the teams winning. So a famous example would be, I remember at Season 4 World Championship, he put a lot of emphasis on when teams didn't have a Mikhails that they could have used to get one specific carry, take a stun off him or something along those lines, and that would allow that guy to continue and win. Or the other way around, they had the Mikhails, but they didn't have a locket against a certain AP composition where that locket would have actually protected one extra guy. He would have stayed alive. They probably would have turned the fight and they could have won the game. This might seem like a very simple area because I've only made it down to two criteria there, one of two items. But obviously there's more depending on where the meta is. But in this particular area, I don't think anyone who's a Western color commentator in League of Legends is as good as Crepo at that area. There's the bigger subset, support. Then you go down, there's a big area rather of support, then you go down to the subset of build paths and impact, then you go to the more specific subset of certain ones, and you can see examples of this, and no one's as good as him as that. Now, that's not all of his casting. Obviously, he's had to work a lot on other aspects, macro aspects, pick ban, going beyond just what he did as a player, but now overall, and then watching other regions that he's not as knowledgeable in. Then we'll go to someone like Deficio. So Deficio was a pro support, not as long as Crepo, not as successful as Crepo, but what is Deficio's strengths? Okay, first of all, Deficio's put a lot of work into being very well-rounded, and he's had more years than someone like Crepo as a dedicated caster, so he's gotten pretty good at being pretty well-rounded. But even so, the specialty of Deficio, what is he the best in compared to everyone else? I think no one in League of Legends is better at breaking down the pick ban. First of all, predicting the pick ban and what would be intelligent and the correct pick, but then secondly, breaking down how this will affect the game and who won out in the pick ban and how that means they'll probably have to play the game. For me, he's almost a god in this area. And actually, this is a natural strength he seemed to have. I remember him doing the Season 3 World Championship, breaking down the final of Royal Club versus SK Telecom, and already in that he was unbelievable, and he hadn't even done it, he hadn't even worked on the other skills of a colourcaster. So when he really got a chance to go ham on that and build up his other skills, he's untouchable in that area for me personally. I also will add in that part of what allows him to be so fantastic, he's buoyed that up by studying more regions than anyone else I'm aware of. Other people watch specific games and whatnot. He not only watches as many games as he can in all the major regions, but he reaches out to journalists and other people and asks them for information so that he can feed all this information into what he's doing, and it makes him as almost as complete in his specialty as he can, and then he tries to be well-rounded in the areas. But for example, at the support position and build paths and impact, Crepo would be better than him on that area. Now, Jat, first of all, Jat will always be the best at NA. Like, he watches some of the other reasons, EU, Korea, especially specific games, but you can tell his knowledge in those areas doesn't go as deep as some of the people from those regions who are the primary colourcasters of those regions. But he takes the basics and the key things you need to know and some of the more innovative aspects of what's changing in the meta, he applies them through his NA prism into his area, and at NA he is one of the best at understanding NA strengths, and specifically I've noticed his key strength comes where he breaks down stylistic choices that teams made in the game. Like for me, Jat is the best when he works on a replay of a game. When he's watching the replay of what happened from, first of all, a macro aspect, and then how lanes fed into the mid game, he will break down a stylistic choice that the team made and what that then led to later in the game. That's where his strength comes from, is able to tell that narrative of the game. I think he does particularly well in that area. Then let's go over to Monte Cristo. So first and foremost, it's obviously macro. That's where all the jokes about the rotations came from and all this sort of thing. He has focused a lot of the game on understanding how the teams themselves rotate around the map, how they balance out objectives, how they trade for objectives, how they take certain comps and put them into another one with their win conditions. That's why he's one of the first people to really stress that term. Understanding how you play to your win conditions and understand the enemy's win conditions, and therefore if you play the efficient and effective way within the game. He's also someone who, this isn't the best strength of his, but he always references patch changes. He's famously the guy who always said what patch they were on at the beginning of the game. And as a result, he tries to keep up with the relative pick strengths to the regions. So in Korea, you had different pick ban than you did in Europe, famously. It was very different, those two regions quite often. So he would always keep on top to where he could of the pick strength relative to their regions and then apply it to his context and comparison within one game in a set region. Now, as you can see when I've labelled all these people, these are different strengths. In the Ultimate Caster would have all these strengths and more. No one has all those strengths. Most of those guys don't even have as good a strength as the other guy. They might be a little bit further along there, or 80% of that, but they're not 100% of it. And so another notion which gets in the way of these discussions of caster knowledge is people thinking that anyone who was an ex-pro automatically has more knowledge because they might have a certain type of knowledge that the guy who was never a full-time pro or wasn't a pro for as long won't have because he didn't play. He doesn't have that first-hand knowledge. Now, again, that's very simplistic because they're thinking, right, well, once he gets done as a caster, he'll have like the 70% knowledge that the other caster has, but then he has an extra 20% that this guy doesn't have because he didn't play and he does, and that's a special extra type of knowledge. Doesn't work that way. Like, first and foremost, if I look at Crepo and Deficio, two former pros, I don't look at them and go, right, it's being ex-pros that's given them this fantastic knowledge. I look at them and I see they had these basic strengths, maybe just as thinkers anyway outside of being a pro, but for coming from being pros when they had their early first chances into the tournaments, like I've referenced already. But when they really put in a lot of effort is when they became godlike in those areas. So studying games, watching games, modeling games, talking to other people about games, trying to stay up to date on things, improving certain skill sets is how they got to be fantastic casters. Guess what? None of that has to do with being a pro. What they've done to become fantastic casters is learn to be casters in their areas, just like every other caster has. Same exact process they all went through. If they'd have just come from being pros, they would have never harnessed those other skills and become better than any of these casters, if indeed you think they are. As much as they might have gained from their playing careers, which they certainly will have gained something, other casters, some will say Monty and Jat, now admittedly Jat was a pro, but a long time ago, not really that relevant to the modern day. Monty and Jat are known as the cerebral thinking colourcasters who spent most of their careers as colourcasters, not players. So we think of Monty and Jat, okay, they have extra info from watching games during the time those other pros were playing games. So the pros who are playing games have a special type of knowledge that the others don't have, but those casters have an additional knowledge that those pros likely will never have, because logistically there isn't enough time in the day for those pros to go back and watch all of the ULCS and NALCS and Korea and LPL from like the 2 or 3 years that they played as pros. So they have a special in-game playing knowledge that the others don't have, but the casters have a special additional knowledge that those guys probably can't catch up on. It's unreasonable to think they will, especially with how many leagues there are now. You've also got to consider that personally, from my own experience of talking to casters and seeing how they think about the game, playing the game, if you had the choice, it never will be like this, but if you had to make a forced choice between playing the game and then the other guy in the same hours watching either that game or other games in the same region, I would choose watching as more beneficial towards actually being a color caster. Because watching, you think about the game in a passive way and you can assess it in a specific way and you can focus on macro and meta-analysis concepts. When you're playing, first and foremost, you're in your role. You're doing what you're doing in your role. You're in your little part of the map with limited information. To the extent that you know more about the team, for example, if you're a shot caller, you might know more aspects in that particular sense, but even then, you're not able to watch the other team and what they were doing in the game. And you can see how you're not watching the opponents as much. You're not studying them the same way. You're thinking within the context of your team. So this is different types of knowledge. And actually, I think watching is more vital to the game. Like I've always said, here's one of the funny things. The reason why someone like Monte Cristo doesn't play League of Legends is actually the same reason why in certain circumstances, people will ask me in CSGO, for example, why I didn't watch some online match that was like just a regular season game. And I'll always say to them, because you have to realize, with the amount of hours I have in the day, if I had 2 extra free hours, I wouldn't watch that meaningless game. I would watch another replay, and I would rewatch a classic game that I think still has some bearing to today, or would help me understand the meta of that day and the evolution of it even more. Likewise, if Monte Cristo had more hours in the day, he wouldn't play League of Legends and try and get really knowledgeable about what support item to build here. He would probably watch some more games from LPL that he doesn't watch, so he could get more of a broad knowledge, more of a specific knowledge that would all fit into his casting career, more so than that very particular knowledge, which wouldn't have so much of an impact. Again, you've got to understand, it's a broad area. We're all cutting out our own path into the forest. And even if you follow someone else's path along, you're probably not going to be as good as them because you've got to choose your own aspects to go off into. And no one can be perfectly well-rounded. So I think it's very naive and it's just unproductive when you're having conversations. Obviously, some casters are better than others based on our own predefined subjective criteria for what we like. But the notion that like there's levels and this guy's at level 2 and he's at level 4 and he's at level 8, very naive, I think, especially when you then add in this aspect that being a pro automatically makes you better than the others or puts you above them. This also seems very naive, frankly, a little bit immature and childish. And I just think, crucially of all, I don't find it productive. I don't think it's helpful to discussion or for those people themselves to get a knowledge of how to watch the game, how to think about the game. Ironic, of course, that those people themselves don't have very much knowledge and don't even have knowledge of how to model knowledge and acquire knowledge and improving intellectually. But that's what leads people to these conclusions.